Harlan Voss's silver pen struck the oak table before anyone in the room breathed. He had pinned the memo to her wall and circled it in red while two nurses watched, and she let him because she was already 3 steps ahead. The woman standing across that long oak table from him was Mara Solano, 38 years old, former Army logistics officer, supply chain director at Riverside Medical Center, and the person holding an audit binder that had just swallowed 14 months of Harlan Voss's carefully buried decisions whole. He had said those words before. He had said them 22 days ago in a fluorescent-lit supply corridor, loud enough for a floor to hear. He was saying them again now, in a room that contained Irene Calloway, 2 board members, Thomas Echeverria and Denise Rourke, because Harlan Voss had spent 53 years learning. That volume was its own kind of proof. What none of them knew yet, what Voss had not yet understood, though the binder lying open in front of him was about to make it plain, was that the woman he called a glorified stock clerk had been building this case before he filed his first board memo against her. Before we show you what was inside that audit binder, and why Voss's face went white when she started reading, stay with her. She was already 3 steps ahead the morning he pinned that memo to her wall. Mara had the binder open. The Biomed lab report was clipped to the front page. Lot numbers, printed in 12-point courier, faced the ceiling. Her Army issue watch caught the overhead light as her finger moved to the first line. The pen left Voss's hand. It hit the oak. The sound was small and total. She read the first lot number aloud. Her voice did not rise. Freeze there. Hold that image. The open binder. The lot numbers exposed. The silver pen on the floor. Voss's face draining of its color the way a room drains of air when a window blows out. Because to understand why that pen dropped, you have to go back 22 days. Back to a 6th-floor supply corridor at Riverside Medical Center, 6:47 in the morning, fluorescent lights humming. The supply corridor on 6 was narrow enough that 2 people passing had to turn sideways. The linoleum floors caught every footstep and threw them back doubled. At 6:30 a.m., the corridor was empty except for Mara Solano, who had been at the supply cage for 40 minutes already. She had dragged the folding chair to the cage door and set 2 binders on it, both open. Sterilization logs on the left, delivery receipts on the right. She cross-referenced them the way she had learned to cross-reference resupply manifests in a combat theater, systematically without hurry, because in the theater a wrong lot number meant a medic reached into a pack and found nothing that worked. The habit had not left her when she traded desert sand for linoleum floors and laminated binders. She had not mentioned this to anyone. At 6:47 a.m., she heard him before she saw him, boots hitting linoleum, the particular cadence of someone who expected the corridor to empty as he moved through it. Harlan Voss came around the corner in post-call scrubs, a dark smear of dried blood on the left sleeve, the silver pen clipped to his breast pocket catching the fluorescent light. He was moving like a man who owned not just the corridor but everything the corridor connected to. He had a printed inventory memo in his hand. He did not slow down. He pinned it to the supply cage wall with his thumb, pulled the silver pen from his pocket, and circled 3 line items in red marker. His voice carried down the corridor to the scrub techs rounding the far corner. Thomas Echeverria, blue scrub cap low on his forehead, stopped at the edge of the scene. He did not speak. He watched. Voss never looked at Mara directly. He addressed the air approximately 8 inches above her head. "Your PAR levels on the thoracic retractor sets are 6 weeks out of alignment," he said. "My OR has been compensating for your department's inventory gap since before you got here. Get it corrected by end of shift or I'll be speaking to the CFO by noon." Mara's pulse was steady. She had spent years learning to keep it that way in rooms where the cost of a visible reaction was a patrol that didn't come back. She waited. Voss capped the pen and walked back the way he came. The scrub techs parted for him. Thomas Echeverria watched him go, then looked at Mara once, a glance that carried something inside it she could not yet name, and followed. Mara reached up and pulled the memo off the wall. She folded it once along the center crease, the way she had folded field orders when she needed both hands free. She slid it into her breast pocket without reading it. Then she sat back down in the folding chair, opened the first lot number binder, and wrote a date in the margin. The date of the first suppressed infection report, the earliest one she had found. She had already known what she was looking for. The question was whether she could prove it before Harlan Voss found out she was looking. Mara had no idea, sitting alone in that supply cage before dawn, that within 6 days she would be reading from those same binders aloud in a conference room, Voss's name spoken into the silence like an accusation written in his own hand. The supply cage on the 6th floor smelled like metal shelving and laminated paper and the recycled air that never quite reached the windows. Mara Solano had been inside it since 5:47 in the morning. Day 2. The floor wouldn't wake up for another hour. She had arranged the lot number binders in a single row along the top shelf, 14 months of Halcyon surgical instrument batches, chronological left to right, tabs laminated and labeled in her own handwriting. The earliest one dated back 20 months, 2 months before the sole source contract was even awarded, covering the tail end of the previous supplier. That was intentional. She needed the baseline. The Army had taught her that anomalies don't announce themselves. You find them by measuring what normal looks like first. She pulled the 5th binder and opened it flat across the folding chair. The smell was different inside. Older paper, toner, the faint chemical edge of sterilization cycle printouts. She ran her index finger down the lot numbers, cross-referencing the delivery manifest on her left against the sterilization cycle timestamps on her right, against the case scheduling data she had pulled from the OR booking system the night before. The timestamps had to match: delivery date, sterilization cycle, case assignment. If any one of those 3 drifted out of sequence, an instrument lot had moved through the system without proper verification. She was looking for drift. She found it on page 6 of binder 5. Not wide, not obvious. 3 lots spread across 7 weeks, each one showing a sterilization cycle timestamp that post-dated the case assignment by between 4 and 11 hours. An instrument processed after it was already scheduled for a procedure. The margin was inside the acceptable window on paper. That was the point. Whoever was managing these lots knew exactly how wide the acceptable window was. Mara wrote the lot numbers in the margin in pencil. She circled the date discrepancy. She did not write any conclusion yet. Conclusions came last. Evidence came first. By 6:45, she had moved to the archive. The infection reports were kept 2 floors down, in a records room off the 2nd floor administrative corridor. The system allowed supply chain directors to pull adverse event documentation for cross-referencing purposes. It was a standard access level, nothing exceptional, nothing that would trip a flag. She had submitted the access request 4 days ago through the official channel, the same way she had done every pull since she started. The archive clerk had the folder ready at the window. She signed for it and carried it back upstairs. 3 reports, 3 manila folders, each thin enough that you could feel the edges of the single-page summaries through the cover. Each one marked in red ink in the top right corner, the word resolved. She set them on the folding chair in a stack and opened the first one. The case was from the 4th floor, post-surgical. A patient who developed a wound complication 8 days after an arthroscopic procedure. The attending physician had flagged it as a possible instrument contamination concern and submitted the report to quality assurance. The date of submission was a Tuesday. The date of closure was a Thursday, 48 hours, flat. The closure note was signed by Denise Rourke and read, "Reviewed and resolved per departmental protocol. No escalation, no FDA filing, no lot number quarantine." The Halcyon lot number cited in the physician's original flag was not referenced anywhere in the closure note. Mara wrote the lot number on a fresh page in her spiral notebook. She noted the attending physician's name. She noted Denise Rourke's signature. She set the folder aside and opened the second one. She wrote that down too. 3 reports, 3 floors, 3 different attending physicians, 3 Halcyon instrument lots, each from Voss's OR scheduling block, each flagged and quietly closed before anyone outside this building had a chance to look at them. Mara stacked the 3 folders together and set them at the back corner of the top shelf, behind the last binder. She would need them later. She knew exactly where they were. She sat back down on the folding chair and pulled the next file from her bag, the Halcyon invoice. She had known something was wrong with it since week 2. She just hadn't been able to prove it until now. The original invoice was in her hand. The cost center field read 4418-B. She set it next to the vendor master she had requested from the finance department's archive, a request she had filed as a routine reconciliation check, nothing that would draw attention. The vendor master for Halcyon Surgical listed the correct cost center as 4418-A, 1 character. The difference between the two was a single letter at the end of a 6-digit alphanumeric code, and it had been changed in the invoice that arrived on her desk. The change was not visible at the standard zoom level in the document management system. It required the archived original, the PDF comparison at 150% magnification, and the vendor master alongside it. She had done all 3. She had screenshots, she had the printouts, she had the file modification metadata from the document management system, which showed that the cost center field in the invoice had been edited after the document was generated by Halcyon's billing system and before it was transmitted to the hospital's procurement inbox. She held that last detail in her mind for a moment. Edited after generation, before transmission. Somebody had opened that invoice file and changed one character in the cost center field before sending it to her desk, knowing she would file it exactly as it read, because that was the job and that was the protocol and no new director questions a vendor master code on week 3. She placed the invoice and the comparison documents in a separate binder, a green one, thinner than the rest, which she kept on the bottom shelf behind the folding chair's leg where it was not immediately visible. She did not label it. She wrote a single note on the inside cover in her small, even handwriting, cost center alteration, post-generation, pre-transmission. She added the date and clipped a paperclip to the corner. She did not tell anyone. At 7:15, footsteps in the corridor. The sharp, even sound of someone moving with purpose across linoleum. Mara looked up without turning her head. Through the cage door, she saw Denise Rourke pass at a clip, QA badge on a lanyard tucked inside her cardigan, eyes forward, not a glance toward the cage, not a pause. 14 months of infection reports closed without escalation, and the woman who signed every one of them walked past like a supply cage was a piece of the building rather than a place where someone worked. Mara watched her until she turned the corridor corner. Then she went back to work. It was Thomas Echeverria who came to her on day 4, mid-morning, worn blue scrub cap pushed back an inch from where it usually sat. He came in under the cover of a routine instrument count. He had the requisition in his hand, held it out flat, the proper paperwork, everything correct. She processed it without comment. He stayed. "You're pulling the Halcyon batch records," he said. Not a question. "Routine audit," Mara said. She did not look up from the binder. He didn't answer. She heard him shift his weight. The cage was small enough that she could hear the change. "The Halcyon arthroscopic sheaths," she said, keeping her voice flat. "Has there been anything worth noting?" The silence lasted long enough that she did look up then. Thomas Echeverria's jaw was set. His eyes were on the middle shelf, not on her. He was weighing something. She could see it in the stillness of his hands, the way his thumb had stopped moving along the edge of the requisition form. "I'm just doing an instrument count," he said. "Right," Mara said. He left 3 minutes later. She watched him go. He had not answered her question, but the fact that he had stayed, and the fact that his jaw had done what it did, was its own kind of answer. She wrote a single line in her notebook, TE, aware of sheath issue, timing unknown. She underlined the last 2 words. She would need to come back to that. The narrator has to pause here, because what Harlan Voss was saying around this time was reaching floors Mara couldn't hear yet. Thomas Echeverria heard it on day 6. He was changing out a supply cart near the surgical scheduling office when Voss's voice came through the half-open door, carrying the particular confidence of a man who believes the room is entirely his. "The supply chain audit protocols she's running are going to slow every OR in this building," Voss said. "That's not a supply problem. That's a liability." Thomas heard the phrase and kept his hands moving. He did not stop to listen. He did not report it. He went back to the floor and did his job and filed it in the part of his mind where he kept the things he was not ready to act on. But he told Mara what he heard on day 14, not on day 6, which meant she went 8 days not knowing that Voss had already begun building a frame around her. The $2.3 million sole source contract Voss had championed to the board 14 months ago was not hard to locate in the hospital's vendor registry. It was a matter of public record. An institutional contract of that size required board approval and a formal disclosure. The disclosure was there. What was not in the vendor registry, and what took Mara 2 additional days of cross-referencing to surface, was the LLC. She found it in the Secretary of State's business filings. A vendor advisory company, incorporated 20 months ago, 8 months before the Halcyon contract was awarded. The registered agent was a law firm. The sole member was listed under a name she did not recognize. But the mailing address on the incorporation document matched a suite in a building 3 blocks from Riverside Medical Center. She checked the lease directory for that building. The suite was registered to a consulting group whose principal she was able to trace through 2 additional public filings, back to a man whose name appeared in the hospital's credentialing records. She printed the filings. She added them to a separate section of the main binder. She did not highlight. She did not annotate. She numbered the pages and noted each source in a log on the inside back cover. The $92,000 was in the vendor advisory account ledger she obtained through the finance archive. Another routine reconciliation request processed without question because supply chain directors were expected to verify vendor payment trails. The payment had been made in 3 installments, each one listed under a line item called Facilitation Services. No contract, no scope of work, no deliverable documentation. She wrote 4% of $2,300,000. She circled the number and set a clean asterisk next to it. She did not write the name of the person she believed had received it. Not yet. On day 7, she found the conflict of interest gap. Mara found this at 6 in the morning, sitting in the supply cage with a cup of iced black coffee going warm on the shelf above her. She pulled up the registry on the laptop, confirmed the absence, cross-referenced the FDA filing, and printed both. She clipped them together with a paper clip and wrote a single note on the top of the stack in the small, even handwriting she used for everything that mattered, not in the registry. Confirmed. Quick pause. If you've made it this far, comment the word watermelon below, then we continue the story. She filed it behind the LLC records in the main binder. She had categorized this as administrative slippage. She had made a note in her own files, the kind of note that gets made and reviewed and made again, and still does not produce a formal action because the person whose floor it involves is a surgeon with board relationships and a 20-year tenure and a contract he championed that the finance committee has already committed to. The note was still in her files on day 7. It had been there for 6 months before Mara Solano walked into this building. Day 14. End of shift. Mara closed the last binder and lined it up with the others on the shelf. 14 months of Halcyon instrument batches, the LLC records printed and tabbed, the 3 manila folders at the back corner, the green binder behind the chair leg, the conflict of interest gap clipped and numbered. The contamination pattern was documented, the financial trail was assembled, the altered invoice was cross-referenced and dated. Not one person in the building knew she had done any of it. She pressed both hands flat on the shelf and looked at the row of binders for a moment. The smell of the cage was the same as day 1. Metal, laminate, recycled air. The labels were in her handwriting. The pages were numbered in her handwriting. The notes in the margins were hers. She turned off the overhead light and reached for her jacket. The desk phone rang. She stood still. It rang a second time. A third. Fourth. She picked it up. "This is Mara Solano." The voice on the other end was clipped and flat. Administrative. Denise Rourke. "I need to clarify something," Rourke said. "The infection reports from floors 3 and 4 that were pulled from the archive this week. I'm checking the access log. Did that request come through official channels, or did you go directly to the floor archive?" Mara set her jacket over the back of the folding chair. She kept her voice even. "Official channels," she said. "Is there a concern?" 3 seconds of silence. Not the silence of someone thinking, the silence of someone who had already done the calculation and was deciding whether to acknowledge what the answer meant. The line went dead. Mara held the receiver for a moment, then set it back in the cradle. She picked up her jacket. She did not look at the binders again. She already knew what was in them. She walked out of the cage, pulled the door shut behind her, and heard the latch click into place in the empty corridor. Within hours of hanging up that phone, Mara would stand in the fluorescent corridor reading her own expulsion from the cage, keycard already dead in her pocket, the HR envelope trembling slightly in her hands. The envelope was taped to the cage mesh at eye level. Mara Solano saw it from 12 feet away before she reached the supply cage door on the 6th floor. She stopped walking. The fluorescent lights above her hummed the same tone they always hummed at 6:40 in the morning. The corridor was empty. Her footsteps had gone quiet the moment she stopped moving. She stepped forward and pulled the envelope free. The paper was standard HR issue, white pre-printed letterhead, her name typed in the address window. She opened it standing there in the corridor and read it once, then she read it again. Formal notice of administrative review, effective immediately. Duration, 5 days. Grounds, alleged unauthorized access to protected patient outcome data. Her keycard privileges for the supply cage and associated record storage had been suspended pending completion of the inquiry. All questions were to be directed to Human Resources, 7th floor. She folded the letter once along its horizontal crease, then once more along its vertical, the same size as the memo. She put it in her breast pocket on top of the memo, which she had carried there every day for 15 days. Then she tried the keycard on the cage reader anyway, force of habit. The light blinked red. She turned and walked toward the elevator. Harlan Voss had moved within 12 hours of Denise Rourke's phone call. Voss had gone to the CFO the following morning, not to HR, not to the general counsel, to the CFO who controlled operating budgets and who had no particular background in clinical governance or data access policy. This was not an accident. What Voss had said, reconstructed later in Calloway's flat, precise voice because she had asked the CFO directly, was this. The CFO had no basis to evaluate the claim. He forwarded it to HR before noon. HR had no basis to evaluate it either, but they had a process. And when a senior physician used words like authorization and patient records in the same sentence, the process was to open a formal inquiry and restrict access while the inquiry ran. The process was the weapon. Voss understood this. He had used it before. What he had not accounted for was that Mara Solano had also used processes before. Different ones. Harder ones. In locations where the penalty for a supply chain failure was not a formal inquiry but a body count. The third-floor break room had a Formica table pushed against the far wall, a laptop terminal on a docking stand, a vending machine that hummed at a slightly higher frequency than the corridor lights, and a smell of stale coffee that no amount of ventilation had ever fully cleared. There was one window. It faced a concrete ventilation shaft. Mara arrived at 7:22. She set her bag on the table, opened it, took out her personal notebook and a pen, and sat down in front of the terminal. Her standard employee login still worked. HR had suspended her keycard access. They had not yet revoked her network credentials, which meant they had followed the intake checklist for a routine administrative review rather than a security suspension. This told her something about how Voss had framed the complaint. He had gone for slow asphyxiation, not a quick cut. He wanted her removed from the physical space. He did not yet know she did not need the physical space. She opened the shared document system and navigated to the section she needed. She did not access anything she had not already accessed. She pulled no new records. She was cross-referencing data she had already memorized against a framework she had already built, and she was doing it on a shared terminal that logged her activity because she wanted the log to show exactly what she had looked at and in what order. Let the log speak for her. She worked for 2 hours before she stood up to get coffee from the machine. The coffee came out in a paper cup, lukewarm with a faint chemical aftertaste. She drank it standing at the window, looking at the concrete shaft. Then she sat back down. She was back at it within 40 minutes of receiving the HR letter. She had lost the cage. She had not lost the work. Here is what you need to sit with for a second. She had been stripped of her office, her keycard, and her title's authority. She had been handed an HR letter accusing her of something she had not done on the basis of a framing she could disprove in 40 minutes if anyone cared to look at the actual access logs. And she was still 3 steps ahead of him. She did not tell anyone what she was building. She did not call a lawyer. She did not walk into HR and object to the process. She understood something Harlan Voss had not considered, something that 14 months of quiet construction had clarified for her. The moment you warn your enemy that the trap is closing, the trap opens. So she said nothing. She sat in the break room with the stale coffee and the humming vending machine, and she worked. Day 15, mid-afternoon. The OR suite on the surgical floor was between cases. Mara had checked the board before she came up. She knew the gap, knew it was 20 minutes, knew Thomas Echeverria would be doing post-case charting near the scrub sink corridor before the next case was called. She found him there. He had his worn blue scrub cap on. He always had the worn blue scrub cap on. He was looking at a tablet, stylus in hand, charting notes in the focused half-attention of someone doing a task he had done several thousand times. Mara stood 8 feet away with her clipboard. She did not approach. She waited. 30 seconds. Thomas finished the charting note, tapped submit, and looked up. He saw her. Something moved across his face. Not surprise, not alarm. Something more controlled than both. She walked toward him. She stopped 2 feet away. She did not make conversation. Have you ever seen a halcyon arthroscopic sheath fail mid-procedure? The question landed in the space between them. Thomas went still. Not the stillness of someone thinking about an answer. The stillness of someone who already had the answer and was deciding whether to say it. He looked at the floor. His jaw set. His hand with the stylus came down to his side. He did not answer, but he did not walk away. Mara waited. She had learned this in a different kind of corridor, in a different kind of institution, that the most useful thing you could do in a moment of someone else's internal conflict was take up less space, not push. Wait. Thomas adjusted his scrub cap with his free hand, a small gesture, the kind a person makes when they need something to do with their hands while their mind is somewhere else. I've seen instruments under stress do things they weren't rated for, he said. Then he walked away, back toward the scrub sink, back toward the next case, back toward the routine that had held him in this building for 11 years. The narrator, that was enough. A man who had nothing to say would have kept walking the first time. What Thomas Echeverria had not said, and what Mara already suspected, was this. A halcyon arthroscopic sheath had failed during a procedure in his OR suite. Not a catastrophic failure. A stress fracture along the articulation joint mid-case discovered when the instrument stopped responding to the standard manipulation. The case had been completed with a substitute instrument. The patient had not been harmed. Thomas had reported it verbally to Voss. Voss had told him the instrument was within tolerance, had said the failure was user error, a technique issue, not a product defect, had said filing a formal report would create paperwork that reflected on the OR team's handling of the equipment. No formal report had ever been filed. Thomas had spent several months carrying this quietly, the way a person carries something they're not sure they should have picked up in the first place. His worn blue scrub cap had been pulled from a shelf in the locker room the morning after that conversation with Voss. He'd worn it every day since. Nobody had ever asked him why. Days 16 and 17 ran together in the break room. She wrote the confirmation of each finding in her notebook in a numbered list. Then she went back to the beginning of the list and checked each entry against its source. Then she started drafting. The MedWatch Adverse Event Report was not a short document. It required lot numbers, batch identifiers, institution name, a named complainant with authorization code, a description of the adverse event or potential adverse event, and a clinical rationale linking the instrument lot to patient safety risk. Mara wrote it offline, on a personal document, on her personal device, sitting in the break room on the evening of day 17 with a paper cup of vending machine coffee going cold beside her notebook. She wrote it in the flat, specific language she had learned writing supply chain discrepancy reports in forward operating logistics, where the difference between a clearly written report and a vague one was sometimes the difference between a resupply arriving and a unit going without. Precision was not a stylistic choice. It was a survival tool. By 11 at night, the document was complete. She read it once more, checking every lot number against the handwritten list in her notebook, checked every batch identifier, checked the date on the LLC incorporation, checked the routing dates on the 3 facilitation fee payments. She did not find any errors. She closed the document and left it on her personal device. She went home. She slept for 6 hours. She was back in the break room at 6:45. Day 18. Morning quiet. The vending machine hummed. The coffee in the paper cup was the same temperature it was always this early, slightly warmer than lukewarm. Mara opened her phone. She had the number for the FDA MedWatch compliance reporting line saved in her contacts under M, which stood for nothing in particular. She had looked it up on day 12. She had written the number in the margin of her notebook. She had not called it until now because she had needed the complete picture first. She dialed. The compliance officer who answered was methodical and unhurried. He asked for the institution name, Riverside Medical Center. He asked for the complainant's name and authorization code. She gave both. He asked for the instrument lot numbers. She read them from her notebook, one by one, slowly enough for him to key each one in. She did not go through the hospital's legal team. She did not notify HR. She did not call Irene Calloway. She did not tell Thomas Echeverria. She did not tell anyone. Voss would find out the way a man finds out his building is on fire, not until the smell reached him. The compliance officer read back each lot number for confirmation. Then he read back the institution name. Then he said the filing was accepted as a preliminary adverse event notification, subject to standard follow-up review, and provided a confirmation number. Mara wrote the confirmation number in the margin of her notebook, in the same handwriting she had used on the binder tabs in the supply cage, in the same handwriting she had used to label 14 months of lot number logs. The pen she used was a standard ballpoint, black ink, the kind that cost less than $1 and did not bleed through the page. She said thank you to the compliance officer and ended the call. She set the phone face down on the Formica table. She looked at the confirmation number in the margin of the notebook for a moment. Then she closed the notebook. The vending machine hummed. The fluorescent light above the door flickered once and held. Mara picked up the paper cup and finished the coffee. Irene Calloway opened it herself. Her assistant had set it on her desk with the morning mail, and Calloway had worked through the stack from bottom to top, the way she always did, so that the most routine items cleared first and the ones requiring judgment came last. The FDA envelope was third from the top. She read it once. Then she set it flat on the desk blotter and read it again. Her hands did not move while she read it. Calloway reached up and removed her pearl earrings. She set them on the desk blotter beside the notification, one at a time, with the precision of someone setting down something that matters. She sat for a moment. Outside her office window, a slow rain had started against the glass, steady and indifferent. She did not call Voss. She did not call HR. She did not call the general counsel. She picked up the phone and called the biomed lab. Day 19, late. The break room was quieter at this hour. The building's evening shift had thinned out the foot traffic in the corridor, and the vending machine's hum was the loudest sound in the room. Mara was at the Formica table with her notebook open, working through a checklist she had built across the previous 4 days, a sequence of documentation steps, each one dependent on the one before it, each one assigned a completion status in a small box she had drawn by hand in the margin. Most of the boxes had check marks. She heard the door open and looked up. She did not come in. "The review period ends tomorrow," she said. Then she turned and left. Her footsteps faded down the corridor in the direction of the elevator. Mara stayed still for a moment. She looked at the doorway where Rourke had been. She could not yet read what the words meant, whether they were a warning, a reminder, or something else entirely. The review period ending tomorrow was information she already had. The fact that Denise Rourke had come to the break room at this hour to say it was the part she did not yet understand. Quick pause. If you've made it this far, comment the word sunflower below. Then we continue the story. She would find out in 36 hours. She turned back to the notebook and wrote the time in the margin, 9:47. Then she drew a box next to it and left it empty. The personal cell phone on the Formica table buzzed. She picked it up. Unknown number. She pressed accept and held it to her ear. Mara's hand tightened around the phone. Her jaw locked. The break room was very quiet. "How long does procedural review take?" she said. "Typically 5 to 10 business days," the compliance officer said. "But I'd encourage you to have any documentation of your authorization to act in this capacity available if we need to follow up." She said she understood. She ended the call. She set the phone back on the Formica table and looked at it for a moment. The confirmation number was still in the margin of her notebook. The filing was still in the system. But the hospital's legal counsel had moved fast, faster than she had expected, which meant Voss had more reach into the general counsel's office than she had estimated. The trap had not opened, but someone had just put their hand on it. By 11:14 a.m. on day 20, she would be standing at the supply cage door with a clipboard, technically barred from her office, when the trauma call came through and the problem she'd already solved became the one Voss was about to create. She had been there since 10:40, not because she knew the call was coming, because she knew the math. The flagged Halcyon thoracic retractor sets were still in rotation. She had documented that on day 17. From a breakroom laptop and a printed supply manifest, the junior tech had slid under the cage door without being asked. 3 days ago, she had walked the adjacent storage bay herself, inventoried the alternate supplier set, confirmed its sterilization certification, checked the lot number against a clean batch record, and positioned it on the second shelf from the top. She had written the lot number in her notebook in ink. She had noted the timestamp. She had done all of this while formally barred from making procurement decisions. The difference between preparation and insubordination, Mara had learned in the Army, was documentation. She had documentation. At 10:52 a.m., the hospital PA system cut through the break room's humming vending machine and the flat smell of yesterday's coffee. Trauma activation, or 3, standby, inbound thoracic, ETA 8 minutes. Mara closed her notebook. She capped the pen. She stood up from the Formica table and walked out of the break room without hurrying, because hurrying would not change the lot number on that pull request. The supply cage sat at the far end of the 6th floor corridor, still padlocked to her keycard. But the junior supply tech was inside. She could see the overhead fluorescent bar flickering through the cage mesh, hear the rolling of a metal cart along the linoleum. "Hey," she kept her voice low. "Pull request is coming for the thoracic retractor set. When it comes in, do not fulfill it until I am standing here." The supply tech, a young man with an orange lanyard she recognized from the instrument count sheets, looked up from the cart. He glanced at the cage door. He glanced at her. He understood enough of the past 20 days to know what the look on her face meant. "Okay," he said. 90 seconds later, the supply system terminal inside the cage chimed. The tech turned the screen toward the mesh so she could read it. The wall phone beside the cage rang. The tech answered it. His expression shifted. He held it out through the pass-through slot without a word. She took the receiver. "I need the Halcyon retractor set up here in 3 minutes. Harlan Voss's voice came through the line the way it always did, brisk, loud, carrying the full weight of a man who had never in his career needed to identify himself by name. "Do not make me come down there." Mara said nothing for 1 second, not because she had no answer, because she wanted that second on record, in her memory, in the texture of what she was about to do. "It's being processed," she said. She handed the receiver back to the tech. She was already moving. "Log the substitution," she said. "Lot number, timestamp my authorization code. Print the log slip and attach it to the case file." The tech looked at the case. He looked at her. Then he looked back at the screen where the Halcyon lot number still sat open in the pull queue. He didn't move for 2 seconds. The tech's hand moved to the keyboard. He began logging. The alternate set went upstairs on a cart at 11:04 a.m. Mara watched it leave the supply floor. Then she turned around and walked back to the break room. She sat down at the Formica table. She opened her notebook. She picked up the pen. She did not watch the monitors. She did not pace the corridor or position herself near the OR board. She had done what the evidence required. The rest was not her domain. The construction worker's surgery lasted 2 hours and 11 minutes. She learned this the way she learned most things on administrative review, obliquely through the ambient sound of the building. The PA went quiet. No escalation calls, no second trauma activation. At 1:17 p.m., the low-frequency hum of the ventilation system was the only sound in the break room, and that was the sound of a building where nothing had gone catastrophically wrong. The construction worker was alive. Voss pulled the cap off his head and folded it once. "That's a supply chain call, not a clinical one." His voice had the same post-procedure flatness it always carried, confident, slightly fatigued, certain that the conversation was happening below his level. "I don't defer to stockroom decisions about instrument quality." Calloway wrote one line in her notepad. She did not write it slowly. She wrote it with the practiced speed of someone who had learned that the men most resistant to the warning were the men who most reliably delivered themselves into the record. She capped her pen and walked to the elevator without responding. She carried the flagged Halcyon retractor set to the biomed lab herself. She stood at the examination table while the lab technician opened the gray lid and laid the 3 retractor arms under the inspection lamp. The finding came 20 minutes later. 2 of the 3 retractor arms showed fracturing along the stress-bearing junction, the hinge point where the instrument flexed under load. The fractures were the kind you could not see in sterilization prep. You could not see them in a pre-op instrument count. You saw them only when the instrument was under the full load of holding a chest open on a breathing human being. By that point, you could not swap it out. You could not pause. The arm would separate inside a living chest during active retraction. The technician described this plainly, without technical language, the way a person describes a physical event they have witnessed the consequences of before. Calloway stood very still for a moment. Then she removed her pearl earrings and set them in her coat pocket. "I need your written findings in the CMO's office by 5 o'clock, she said. "I need the chain of custody documented from OR3 to this table. Do not release the instrument set back to supply under any circumstances." The technician nodded and began writing. Calloway stepped into the hallway outside the biomed lab and stood there for a moment beside a window that looked out over the hospital's west parking structure. Her jaw was set. Her hands were still at her sides. She had suspected irregularities on Voss's floor for months. She had moved slowly. She was reckoning with that now. She picked up her phone and called the CMO's administrative line. "Schedule the credentialing review for day 23, she said. "Full panel, audit materials, biomed findings, HR file, and any written statements submitted by staff. Send notice to all named parties today." She ended the call and walked back toward the elevator. At 2:41 p.m., a formal complaint notification landed in Mara's breakroom inbox. She saw it arrive on the laptop screen, a message from the hospital's HR compliance system. Routing number visible, her name in the subject line. She opened it. Formal complaint. Unauthorized substitution of physician-ordered instrument set during active administrative review. Filed by H. Voss, M.D., Chief of Surgical Services. The complaint cited exceeding scope of authority, failure to comply with administrative review restrictions, and interference with clinical operations. It requested immediate escalation of her employment status to formal disciplinary hearing. She read it once through. Then she read the section on the substitution again, the paragraph where Voss had described her action as a unilateral and potentially dangerous override of a treating physician's clinical judgment. She thought about the instrument case on the biomed lab table, the fractured retractor arm, the construction worker in post-op whose chest had been held open with a different set of instruments because she had carried them up from the storage bay herself. She added the complaint printout to the personal binder she had been building, behind the lot number logs, behind the LLC incorporation records, behind the 3 closed infection reports. She did not write anything in the margin. There was nothing to write. The document said everything she needed it to say about the choices Harlan Voss was making on day 20. He filed a complaint about the woman who had just kept a man alive. That was the choice he made. She closed the binder. She set it on the Formica table beside the chipped edge where someone had once set a coffee mug too hard. She picked up the iced black coffee she had brought down from the third-floor machine at noon and found it had gone warm. The break room door opened. A woman stepped in. Not from HR, from the hospital's legal department. Dark blazer, no lanyard, a document folder held flat under one arm. She looked at Mara with the careful expression of someone who had been sent to deliver news they had not personally chosen. She set a single document on the Formica table in front of Mara. It landed with the soft weight of something that had already been reviewed by several people before it reached this room. The FDA procedural challenge, she said. Her voice was even, administrative. They're arguing your filing may be invalid. We've been asked to advise you not to contact the MedWatch office again pending internal review. Mara looked at the document. She did not pick it up. She looked at the woman from legal instead. Dark blazer, no lanyard, careful expression. Someone doing a job she had been handed, not one she had chosen. Mara understood that distinction better than most. Who filed the challenge? Mara asked. The woman's expression did not change. That's part of the internal review process, which meant someone inside the building had contacted the FDA's compliance office and raised procedural objections to the timing and routing of her filing, which meant Voss, or someone working at his direction, had found the one thread worth pulling. Mara looked back at the document. That was the argument. Not that she was wrong, that she had moved too fast and through the wrong door. She had expected this, not the timing. Day 20 was faster than she had estimated, but the strategy itself she had mapped 3 days ago in the break room while the construction worker was still in post-op and Voss was still in the building making decisions. Procedural challenge to the filing was the only remaining instrument Voss had that didn't require him to prove she was wrong. He couldn't prove she was wrong. The biomed lab was already doing that for her. She reached across the Formica table and picked up the legal document. She read it in full. It was 4 pages. She took approximately 90 seconds. She looked at the woman from legal. Has Calloway seen this? A pause. The CMO's office was notified. When? This morning. Tell whoever sent you, Mara said, that the filing stands. The FDA compliance officer received a complete package. Lot numbers, batch documentation, clinical timeline. The routing question is a procedural footnote. The contamination pattern is not. The woman from legal looked at her for a moment. Then she picked up the document folder, tucked it back under her arm, and left. The break room door swung shut. The vending machine hummed. Mara sat with the closed binder on the Formica table in front of her, and the warm iced coffee to her right, and the faint PA noise drifting through the walls of a hospital that was still running its afternoon. She pulled the lot number log from the front of the binder and opened it to the last annotated page. She picked up her pen. She kept working. The suspension would come through by morning, a reprieve so clean it would let her believe the worst had passed, her keycard waiting in a drawer somewhere, the supply cage still there, still hers, still holding the shelf she'd left behind 3 weeks ago. The HR notification came through at 7:14 a.m. on day 21. Mara read it on her phone standing in the third-floor break room, one hand on the counter beside the humming vending machine. The formal inquiry is suspended pending outcomes of a CMO-level review. You are cleared to return to your workspace effective immediately. 11 lines. No apology, no explanation. She finished her iced black coffee, set the cup in the sink, walked to the elevator. The keycard worked on the first try. She stood in the doorway of the supply cage for a moment. The caged metal shelving, the labeled binders in their numbered sequence, the single folding chair tucked exactly where she'd left it. The fluorescent light above the third shelf had been doing a faint flicker for 2 weeks, still flickering. She had not been certain she would see this room again. She did not let that certainty stay long. She set her bag on the folding chair, pulled the first lot number binder from the shelf, and opened it. Nothing had been moved, nothing had been altered. Every dated notation was exactly as she had left it. She stood with the binder open and held that fact for a few seconds. It meant one of 2 things. Either no one had thought to look, or someone had looked and decided not to touch it. Both possibilities were worth holding. She worked for 2 hours without stopping. Thomas Echeverria appeared at the cage door at 10:30. He didn't come inside. He stopped at the doorframe, one hand on the metal edge, his worn blue scrub cap pulled low. He looked at the shelving briefly, then at Mara. The patient from yesterday's trauma case is in recovery, he said. They expect a full outcome. He adjusted the scrub cap. He walked away. Mara watched the empty doorway for 3 seconds. She wrote nothing down. She didn't need to. That was his way of telling her he understood what she had done, and that he was still thinking about what he had not yet done. The narrator notes briefly that Loud Voss was a performance. He needed an audience. He needed a floor that could hear him, scrub techs who could carry the story back. Quiet Voss was different. Quiet Voss was running numbers. According to the account Irene Calloway would later reconstruct, Voss spent most of day 21 on the phone with the hospital's general counsel. Not about the biomed lab, not about the Halcyon retractor set that was now sitting in the biomed facility, removed from supply rotation on Calloway's direct order the previous afternoon, about the MedWatch filing. His argument, as it came back through channels, was narrow and technical. A supply chain director does not have authority to file an adverse event report on behalf of a named medical institution without CMO sign-off. The filing was submitted without institutional authorization. Therefore, it was procedurally invalid. Therefore, it should be challenged before the CMO review convened. It was a tight argument, it had a real legal surface, and it was, the narrator notes without decoration, exactly the kind of argument that does not survive a biomed lab report clipped to the front of an audit binder. But the biomed lab had not delivered that report yet, and Voss knew that. End of shift. The cage was tidy. The binders were in order. The lot number log for day 21 had 2 new entries, both initialed, both time-stamped. Mara turned off the overhead light and stood in the half-dark for a moment. The flickering fluorescent above the third shelf had gone still. She noted that too, the way she noted everything. She locked the cage. Her cell phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She pulled it out. Unknown number. No contact name. No preamble. 4 words. Legal wants it buried. She read it twice. She looked up at the cage door. The padlock was seated correctly. The shelving was visible through the metal mesh. The binders standing in their sequence. Quick pause. If you've made it this far, comment the word thunder below. Then we continue the story. She pocketed the phone. She did not know yet who had sent it. She would know in 36 hours. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button for the lobby. The doors closed. The next morning at 7:52 a.m., the phone on her kitchen counter rang. Calloway's assistant, the CMO, was requesting a meeting, not a review, not a formal proceeding. A meeting. 15 minutes. The conference room, 9 a.m. Sitting in the elevator descent, she did not yet know that the meeting Calloway had called would hinge not on what she had filed, but on what the hospital's own lawyers were quietly preparing to argue against it. Mara arrived at the CMO conference room at 9 a.m. on day 22. She had her bag on her left shoulder and the faded olive-green Army-issue wristwatch on her left wrist, and the watch read 8:58 when she pushed through the door. Irene Calloway was already at the head of the oak table. No notepad, no pen, just Calloway's hands flat on the surface, and the gray institutional carpet absorbing the sound of Mara's footsteps. Mara would think about that empty table later, what it meant that Calloway had come in without anything to write on. "Sit down," Calloway said, not unkindly, but without warmth either. Mara sat, Mara's jaw set. She did not speak. She slid a single-page document across the oak table. "This is Dr. Voss's formal complaint. I'm going to read the relevant section aloud." She read it flat, like a weather report. Calloway set the document down. Then she reached up and removed her pearl earrings, first the left, then the right, and set them on the table beside the document. Mara watched her do it. The narrator notes what Mara already understood in that moment. The earrings coming off meant Calloway was done speaking as an institution. What came next would be something else. "He didn't confront you," Calloway said. "He built 2 parallel tracks. He doesn't need to win both of them. He needs only one to hold long enough to buy time. Enough time to push the Halcyon contract renewal through the board before the audit findings can be formally entered into the record." Mara looked at the complaint on the table. The language was precise, clean, the kind of language that had been drafted, revised, and reviewed before it ever reached the page. "The procedural challenge to the MedWatch filing has a narrow window in which it can succeed," Calloway said. "Approximately 48 hours. After that, the FDA's own procedural timeline closes the challenge automatically. The filing stands, irreversibly." She folded her hands. "I need to know if your audit trail is complete enough to survive a credentialing review that convenes before that window closes." Mara reached into her bag. She set the LLC and corporation records beside it. She did not speak. Calloway looked at the binder. She looked at the LLC records. She looked at the invoice. Her hands stayed flat on the table for a long moment. Then she picked up the phone on the table's edge and called her assistant. Another pause, shorter. Day 23, morning. She hung up. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The hum of the ventilation system above the conference room was the only sound. Mara began to gather the documents back into her bag with the same unhurried precision she used on the lot number logs every morning before shift. The window is 48 hours, Calloway said again, quietly. Don't be late. Mara stood, picked up her bag, and left. The sixth-floor hallway outside the conference room was quiet in the late morning light coming through the single window at the far end. One bench against the wall, nobody on it. Mara's footsteps on the linoleum were the only sound as she walked toward the elevator with the audit binder tucked under her arm. Her phone buzzed. She stopped. The screen showed the same number as the night before, the anonymous text that had read, "Legal wants it buried." The new message was 4 words. "I'll be there." Mara stared at the screen. She did not know who was coming. But 36 hours earlier, Denise Rourke had opened a spreadsheet and begun calculating the distance between institutional loyalty and a federal filing that already had her name in the closed report fields, and the math had finally resolved in a direction Voss had not prepared for. 4 days would pass before Mara returned to that same oak table with the lot number log spread in sequence, and Denise Rourke would finally be sitting across from her, not as a witness to silence, but as one. 4 days after she walked out of the break room with a confirmation number written in the margin of her notebook, Mara Solano was back at the oak table, and this time she brought everything. The CMO conference room at Riverside Medical Center looked the same as it always did. Long oak table, institutional gray carpet that absorbed sound the way carpet in rooms like this always did. A whiteboard at the far end with nothing erased, not from the last meeting, not from the meeting before that. Whatever had been written on it was gone, but the ghost of the marker was still there in the surface, pale lines that meant nothing anymore. Calloway sat at the head of the table. She had arrived before anyone else. She had a single folder in front of her and nothing else. The 2 board members sat to her right, flanking her. They had driven in from separate parts of the city. One of them had a yellow legal pad and a ballpoint pen. The other had nothing in front of him and his hands folded on the table. They had not spoken to each other. They had not spoken to Calloway. They were waiting. Thomas Echeverria stood near the door. He had not taken a seat. He wore the worn blue scrub cap he always wore, and he kept his hands at his sides, and he watched the room the way a man watches a room when he is trying to decide if he still belongs in it. Harlan Voss sat at the opposite end from Mara. He had the silver pen in his hand. He had already set his coat on the back of his chair. He looked like a man who had been in this room 100 times and expected to leave it the same way he always had. Mara set the audit binder on the table in front of her. She set it down flat. She did not open it yet. Calloway said, "This credentialing review is convened under Article 7 of Riverside Medical Center's peer review charter. The panel includes myself as CMO, 2 members of the hospital board, and witnesses called pursuant to a formal adverse event investigation. Dr. Voss, you have been provided the procedural summary. Do you wish to make an opening statement?" Voss did not wait for the end of the sentence. "Yes," he said. "I do." He stood. He did not look at Mara. The board member with the legal pad wrote something. The other one looked at Voss without blinking. Calloway said, "Thank you, Dr. Voss." She reached up and removed her pearl earrings. She set them on the table beside her folder, one and then the other. She did not look at Voss while she did it. Nobody in the room said anything about the earrings, but everyone in the room saw them. Calloway said, "Ms. Solano." Mara opened the audit binder. Then she turned to the second page and read the second lot number, then the third. She placed the first manila folder on the table and opened it. She placed the second folder beside it and opened that one, then the third. 3 folders, 3 reports, each one thin, each one carrying the same boilerplate closure language, each one missing the escalation that Riverside Medical Center's own protocols required. She named the lot number from each report. She named the Halcyon batch designation. She named the closure date, 48 hours, 47 hours, 46 hours. The board member with the legal pad picked up the first report. He read the closure notation at the bottom. He turned the page. He read the back. He set it down and picked up the second one. Voss opened his mouth. Calloway said, "Dr. Voss, you will have an opportunity to respond." He closed his mouth. Calloway turned to Thomas Echeverria. "Mr. Echeverria, the panel has called you as a witness regarding a specific instrument event. Can you describe in your own words what you observed?" Thomas straightened the worn blue scrub cap. He took one breath. His jaw set, and then he began to speak. Then he said what Voss had told him. The room was quiet. Voss said, "Thomas, you're describing a routine." "Dr. Voss." Calloway raised one hand. Voss stopped. Calloway looked at Denise Rourke. Ms. Rourke, you've provided a written statement to this panel. I'm going to read it into the record. Rourke's hands were flat on the table in front of her. She did not look at Voss. Calloway opened the folder. She read without inflection, the way you read something that does not need your voice to make it land. Calloway set the statement down. The board member with the legal pad stopped writing. He put the pen down on the pad and looked at Rourke. Voss said, "That document is hearsay from an employee facing her own disciplinary exposure. It has no evidentiary standing in a credentialing review." He said it loudly. He said it with the same authority he always used, the authority built over 30 years in rooms where volume had been its own kind of credential. The two board members looked at each other. They had heard the word evidentiary in a credentialing review from the man the review was about. The board member with the legal pad picked it back up and wrote something. He wrote it slowly and deliberately, the way a man writes something he wants to be able to read later. Mara reached into the audit binder and pulled out 2 pages clipped together at the top left corner. She placed them on the table. The first page was an LLC incorporation record filed with the state. The incorporation date was at the top. The second page was a printed routing document showing a transfer of $92,000 through a vendor advisory account to the LLC on record. She placed her hand flat on the documents, not covering them, just anchoring them, and she said for the first time in that room, without raising her voice, without looking at Voss. Voss's pen stopped moving against the table surface where he had been clicking it. He set it down. He picked it up again. The board member, who had not yet written anything, leaned forward and looked at the incorporation date. Calloway took the Biomed lab report from the front of Mara's audit binder. She unclipped it. She read it aloud. She did not use the technical language. She used the words the lab had used, and then she followed them with the words those findings meant. She set the report down. The two board members went still, not the stillness of people thinking, the stillness of people who have already understood something and are waiting for the room to catch up. Voss stood. His voice was the same volume as before, but the narrator knew, anyone in that room knew, that volume was the only thing left of it. The foundation under the voice was gone. He looked at the board members. He looked at them the way he had looked at every room for 30 years, as a room he was about to convince. Neither of them looked back. The one with the legal pad was reading the LLC incorporation date again. The other one had turned the Biomed lab report over and was reading the technical findings on the back page. Calloway waited until Voss sat down. He sat down slowly, like a man whose legs have made a decision his mind hasn't caught up to yet. She addressed him directly. "Dr. Voss," she said, "the credentialing review panel is prepared to make one of 2 findings." Her voice was the same voice it had been at the start, precise, not loud. It did not need to be loud. Finding 1, you agree to operate under a formal procurement protocol, Ms. Solano's audit system, adopted division-wide under CMO oversight, effective immediately. The review panel refers the LLC documentation and facilitation fee to the hospital's compliance officer and external counsel for civil and regulatory review. Those proceedings continue independent of your continued service, contingent on full cooperation. She paused. Finding 2, the panel refers the full record, the LLC, the 3 suppressed reports, the altered invoice, the Biomed finding, and the MedWatch filing, to the State Medical Board for license review proceedings, with a concurrent referral to federal authorities regarding the facilitation arrangement. The room did not move. Mara looked down at the open audit binder. The lot numbers were facing the ceiling. She read the first one aloud again, not because it needed to be read again, because it was hers to read, and she was going to read it to the end. She read each one in sequence, 14 months of Halcyon instrument batches, lot by lot, the way she had read every supply manifest in every forward operating base supply cage she had ever worked, clear, flat, without drama, because the drama was already in the numbers and the numbers did not need her help. Harlan Voss's face went white, not from anger. Anger would have been something he knew how to use. This was the specific pallor of a man who has just understood that the paper trail he spent 14 months believing was buried is the only thing in the room. Everything else, his authority, his tenure, the 30 years of surgical medicine he invoked 20 minutes ago, was sitting outside in the hallway. It had not been invited in. The silver pen dropped from his hand onto the oak table. It was not a dramatic sound. It was the sound of a silver pen hitting oak, small and total, and the same sound a fact makes when it lands in a room where no one can pretend not to hear it. Voss's hands flattened on the table. He looked at the binder. He looked at the 3 manila folders. He looked at the LLC incorporation record with his name at the top. Thomas Echeverria watched Voss's hands on the table. He did not move from the wall. He did not speak. He had said what he came to say, and the rest of it was not his to carry. The board member with the legal pad closed it. He put the pen down on top of it and left it there. The other board member put the biomed report flat on the table and folded his hands on top of it. Calloway sat straight, pearl earrings beside her folder, one and then the other. She waited with the patience of a woman who has been waiting for something to be in the room long enough to finally act on it. The lot numbers faced the ceiling from the open binder. The silver pen lay on the oak table between Voss's flattened hands and the edge of the audit pages. Calloway said in the same measured tone she had used throughout, "Dr. Voss, we'll need your answer." The silence that followed was not empty. It was the silence of a room that had received everything it needed and was waiting for one last piece to fall into place. The gray carpet absorbed the sound of Voss's breathing. The whiteboard with its ghost lines held the far wall. The fluorescent light above the table did not flicker. Mara did not look at Voss. She looked at the binder. She closed the cover. Not hard, not with ceremony, just the way you close something when it has done what it was built to do. She set her hand on top of it. The room waited. She unlocked the supply cage. The metal shelving stood in its rows. The laminated lot number logs were in their labeled binders on the second shelf, exactly where she had left them. The folding chair was at the small desk in the corner. She sat down. She opened the top binder to the current page. She picked up a pen and began updating the lot number log by hand. New entries, today's date, the verification notations she had mentally cataloged during the review. Her handwriting was small and even. She wrote each lot number in full. She wrote the date beside it. She wrote the disposition code. She finished the last entry on the page. She capped the pen. She set the binder flat and squared the edge of it against the edge of the desk the way she squared every document she had ever filed. She reached up and turned off the light. Quick pause. If you've made it this far, comment the word ocean below. Then we continued the story. The darkness held for a moment. Then the corridor light outside the cage caught the edge of the binder on the desk, the spine of it, her name on white, and that was enough. The memo did not mention Harlan Voss by name. It did not need to. He kept the worn blue scrub cap on when he submitted the paperwork. The construction worker was discharged on day 26. Full recovery expected. His chart carried no notation about instrument substitution. It carried only the outcome. Stable, discharged, follow-up in 4 weeks. Mara never saw the chart. She didn't need to. She had positioned that alternate set 3 days in advance. She had signed the transfer log. The log was in the binder. The binder had been on the table. That was the whole of it. Denise Rourke's written statement remained part of the credentialing review record. Her name was in the closed report fields. Her name was now also in the testimony that cleared them. The distance between those two facts was not nothing. It was the distance between a person who executes an order and a person who eventually decides what the order was worth. Mara updated the lot number log every day that week. Same time, same desk, same handwriting. Small even, each number written in full. The new protocol binder did not move from the top shelf. The fluorescent light above the third shelf did not flicker. The supply cage smelled the way it always had. Cool metal, laminated paper, the faint antiseptic drift from the corridor. She did not mark the occasion. She did not require anyone to mark it for her. She had come in with a notebook and a watch on her left wrist and 14 months of someone else's decisions buried in a filing system he thought no one was reading. She had read it. That was the job. That had always been the job. She filed the page, labeled the binder, and went back to work. Everything Mara had documented, everything she had filed away in those 14 months was about to walk into a conference room where Harlan Voss would have to choose what his silence was worth. The credentialing review closed at 11:43 a.m. on day 23. Harlan Voss signed the compliance agreement at 11:51 a.m. His choice in writing, witnessed by Irene Calloway, 2 board members, Thomas Echeverria and Denise Rourke, was to adopt Mara Solano's procurement protocols under formal CMO oversight. His signature was clean and unhurried. He had always known how to perform composure. What the pen could not hide was the empty space on the breast pocket of his white coat where the silver pen had been. He had not picked it up from the floor. The choice was not the protection he hoped it would be. Calloway's compliance officer had the LLC incorporation records and the $92,000 routing documentation in the hands of external legal counsel within 24 hours of the review closing. External counsel did not sit on it. Within 72 hours, the state attorney general's office opened a civil inquiry into undisclosed facilitation arrangements in healthcare contracting. The inquiry had Harlan Voss's name on it, not the hospital's name, not the department's name, his. The AG's office confirmed receipt this morning, Calloway told Mara later. They have the LLC filing, the routing records, and the Halcyon contract approval timeline, all of it. Mara nodded. She already knew. She had assembled those records herself. The board met at its next regular session and voted to terminate the Halcyon Surgical Sole Source contract, the full $2,300,000 two-year arrangement, canceled on the grounds of undisclosed conflict of interest and the Biomed Lab's microfracturing finding. Halcyon's instrument lots were placed under formal quarantine pending an FDA review of the full lot series. The quarantine confirmation arrived at Riverside Medical Center in writing, addressed to the supply chain director's office. Mara received it in the supply cage. She opened the envelope at the folding chair, read it once, and placed it in the appropriate binder, the one labeled Halcyon Lot Quarantine, in her own handwriting on the tab. The civil suit came next. The state attorney general's office filed against Harlan Voss personally for undisclosed facilitation in a sole source healthcare contract. The suit named the sum, $92,000, named the LLC, named the consulting relationship that Halcyon's principal validation investigator had failed to disclose in the hospital's conflict of interest registry. The hospital's compliance officer confirmed the referral on the record at a mandatory staff briefing. The room was quiet when the number was read aloud. The credentialing review panel's final written finding referred all three suppressed infection reports, formally entered into the record with Denise Rourke's written statement confirming Voss's direction, and with Thomas Echeveria's sworn testimony attached, to the State Medical Board for review of license standing. The referral was not a summary, it was a packet, delivered by courier. The audit binder's infection report section, the Biomed Lab finding, and the full testimony record. The State Medical Board opened a formal inquiry within 2 weeks of receipt. Harlan Voss was required to step down from clinical duties at Riverside Medical Center pending the outcome of that inquiry. He was not escorted by security. There was no public announcement over the intercom. He gathered his things from the surgical locker room on a Thursday afternoon and walked out through the 6th floor corridor, the same corridor where 23 days earlier he had pinned the inventory memo to the supply cage wall and circled 3 line items in red marker. The fluorescent lights hummed the same way they had at 6:47 a.m. The linoleum still echoed under his footsteps. No one turned to watch him go. That was its own answer. The hospital's legal counsel withdrew the procedural challenge to the MedWatch filing the morning the credentialing review convened. The filing stood. It had always stood. The 48-hour window Calloway had described in the conference room had not been a threat to Mara's case. It had been a test of whether her evidence was ready when the window opened. It was ready. It had been ready since day 14. Denise Rourke's written statement, precise and unsparing, confirmed that Voss had directed her to close each of the 3 infection reports without escalation, and that Mara's PO error traced directly to a Halcyon invoice that arrived with a cost center code matching no active departmental account at Riverside Medical Center. The statement confirmed what the altered invoice already showed. Rourke had not acted out of courage. She had acted out of calculation. Her name was in the closed report fields on all 3 suppressed reports, which made her complicit and therefore exposed once the federal inquiry opened. She was placed on administrative leave pending a compliance review. What came after that was not the narrator's story to tell. The late afternoon on day 23 settled over the 6th floor, the way institutional buildings settle after something large has shifted. Not dramatic, not loud, just quieter than it had been. Mara was sitting on the single bench in the hallway outside the CMO conference room when Irene Calloway came through the door. Calloway was carrying her pearl earrings in her closed right hand. She had not put them back on. She sat down on the bench without asking permission. "There's something I want you to know," Calloway said. Mara waited. 8 months ago, before you were placed on performance management before the board memo, you refused to sign off on a falsified inventory report. You flagged it, you documented the discrepancy, and you sent it up the chain. It went nowhere. Voss had enough institutional cover to absorb it. Calloway's voice did not waver, but she looked at her hands. That refusal was the first thing I confirmed when I began my own quiet review. I had suspected something was wrong on his floor for longer than I care to admit. I moved too slowly. I want you to know that I know that. She did not say sorry. She said the true thing. The narrator understood that sometimes that is harder. "I know," Mara said. Calloway nodded once. She stood, set the pearl earrings back in her ears, both of them one at a time, and walked back through the conference room door. The hallway was quiet after that. Late afternoon light came through the single window at the far end, long and pale against the institutional gray carpet. Tomas Echeverria appeared from the stairwell door. He was still wearing the worn blue scrub cap, the same way he always wore it. On the surgical floor, off the surgical floor, it made no difference. He saw Mara on the bench. He did not stop walking at first. He passed the bench by 3 steps. Then he stopped. He turned back. He reached up and pulled the scrub cap off his head. He held it at his side, crumpled in one hand, his knuckles white against the faded blue fabric. He stood like that for a moment, looking at her, not saying anything. Then he put the cap back on, adjusted the brim once, and walked away toward the elevator without a word. That was his apology for the 2 weeks he had waited, for the halcyon arthroscopic sheath failure mid-procedure that he had witnessed and never formally reported. He was not forgiven by the silence. Forgiveness was not what had passed between them in that hallway. What passed between them was an acknowledgement. He had known, and he had held it, and now he would not hold it anymore. He filed the retroactive incident report the following morning. Mara received a copy in the supply cage. She filed it in the new protocol binder. The supply cage on the 6th floor was the same narrow room it had always been. Caged metal shelving, laminated lot number logs in labeled binders, one folding chair, the fluorescent light above the 3rd shelf that had stopped flickering on the morning she returned from suspension and had stayed steady since. It smelled faintly of corrugated cardboard and disinfectant. It was not a comfortable room. It was a useful one. Mara came back to it at the end of day 23 after the hallway bench, after Calloway, after Tomas Echeverria and his blue scrub cap. She sat down in the folding chair and opened the lot number log to the current page, the same methodology she had used for 2 weeks before anyone in this building understood what she was doing, the same dated notation, the same cross-reference against delivery receipts and sterilization records, the same ink on paper that she had used in theater when the supply chain was the difference between a medic with instruments and a medic with nothing. She had learned it then. She had carried it here. She had not been wrong to. She worked through the evening's entries without rushing. 2 halcyon quarantine lots confirmed, removed from rotation. She noted the confirmation numbers, the removal timestamps, the alternate supplier lot substitution on each line. She entered the FDA acknowledgement reference number from the morning's confirmation email. She cross-referenced the biomed lab finding against the retractor set's original lot entry and marked the disposition field, removed, quarantined, referred. She did this for every item that required it. When she was done, she turned to the next clean page and wrote the date at the top. Above her, on the shelf above the cage's 2nd section, the new protocol binder sat with its spine facing out, her name on the spine, in the institutional label font that the print shop on the 2nd floor used. Mara Solano, Supply Chain Director, Procurement Protocol Revised. She had not looked at it while she worked. She did not need to. She knew what was in it because she had written it, and she knew it was right because she had tested every line of it against 14 months of evidence that something had been wrong. She closed the log. She set the pen down on top of it, the same plain ballpoint she had used every morning since day 1, black ink, no particular brand. She stood up, pushed the folding chair in, and turned off the light. She did not need anyone in that room to know she had been right. She needed the lot numbers to be right, and they were. The morning after day 23 came in without ceremony. Riverside Medical Center's 6th floor was quieter than usual at 6 a.m. The fluorescent lights hummed the same way they always had. The linoleum reflected the same pale overhead wash. The supply cage sat at the end of the corridor exactly where it had always sat. Cage shelving, laminated binders, one folding chair. Mara arrived at her normal time. She unlocked the cage, hung her jacket on the same hook she had used since her first week, and pulled the lot number log from the shelf. She opened it to the page she had dated the night before. There were 3 deliveries scheduled before 9. She confirmed the first against the pending receipt ledger before the elevator at the far end of the corridor had finished its first run. That was all it was. Work, not vindication, not ceremony. Work. Tomas Echeverria found her at 7:45. He did not knock. The cage did not have a door that invited knocking. It had a latched gate, and he stopped at it with his worn blue scrub cap already on, the way he always wore it when he was heading toward the OR floor. He did not speak immediately. That was Thomas's way. He stood, and he waited, and when Mara looked up from the ledger, he said what he had come to say. The alternate set held. Mara set the pen down. The retractor set, Thomas said. The one you pulled from the backup supply. Biomed ran the full post-op review this morning. No microfracturing, no fatigue stress on any of the 3 arms. It held clean through a 4-hour thoracic case. He paused. He's in recovery, awake, asking for coffee. Mara did not say anything for a moment. Good, she said. Tomas nodded once, the way he nodded when he had said the thing he came to say and did not need to say more. He turned to leave. Thomas, he stopped. What you said in the room yesterday. She meant the CMO conference room, the credentialing review, his testimony about the arthroscopic sheath failure, the thing he had stayed quiet about for 14 months and had finally said aloud in front of Calloway and the board members and Harlan Voss. It took something, saying that. Tomas looked at the floor for a moment, then back at her. It took less than staying quiet did. He touched the brim of his scrub cap once, a small, private gesture, and walked back toward the elevator. Mara watched him go. Then she picked the pen back up. The formal notification from Irene Calloway's office arrived at 9:17 by institutional email. It was brief, institutional prose, no flourishes. It confirmed that the credentialing review had concluded. It confirmed that all administrative inquiries opened against Mara Solano's employment record during the 5-day review period had been closed without finding. It confirmed that the revised procurement protocol bearing her name had been adopted as Riverside Medical Center policy, effective immediately, under direct CMO oversight. It confirmed that the Halcyon Surgical sole source contract had been referred to the board's audit committee and to the hospital's legal counsel for formal review, and that the instrument lots identified in the FDA MedWatch adverse event filing had been placed in full quarantine pending that review. It did not name Harlan Voss. It did not need to. The referral to the board's audit committee said everything his name would have said, and said it in language that could not be walked back, appealed to a friendlier corridor, or quietly buried in a departmental memo. Mara read the email once. She printed it, dated the printout, and filed it in the binder behind the lot number log. Then she went back to the delivery receipts. The supply cage held its particular quiet through the rest of the morning. The protocol binder sat on the shelf above the second section with its spine facing out, her name in institutional label font, the title beneath it in the same even type. She had not moved it since the print shop returned it. She did not plan to. It belonged on that shelf, in that cage, next to the laminated lot number references and the sterilization timestamp cross-index she had built from scratch in the 2 weeks before anyone in the building understood what she was assembling. The olive green Army issue watch on her left wrist read 9:42 when she finished the morning's last entry, closed the log, and set the pen precisely on top of it. She did not look at the protocol binder. She turned off the light. If you watched her do all of that, 2 weeks, a breakroom laptop, a binder full of lot numbers, and you still think the person with the title is always the person with the answer, subscribe and stay. Because there are more stories like hers, and they all start the same way. Someone was told they didn't belong, and they were already 3 steps ahead. Mara Solano, former Army logistics officer, supply chain director, the woman who counted everything,